Hello, my fellow gore horror besties. Welcome to another episode of Gore Horror, the podcast where we dive deep into some of the dark and most disturbing true crime stories. But please be advised that today's episode is not for the faint of heart. We're going to be discussing graphic and deeply upsetting content, so listener discretion is strongly advised. Today we're tackling a case that shocked the world. It's tragic, it's horrific, and it's so sad. It's the murder of two young children at the hands of their own mother, Susan Smith. So this case not only rocked a nation, but also left a lasting impact on the community in South Carolina. The twists and turns of the Susan Smith story are as chilling and as heartbreaking. And to help us navigate through this difficult case, I'm joined by a very special guest, a true good friend of mine, my dear friend Ian. Ian is a former TV news producer who was covering the investigation and trial of Susan Smith in Charlotte, North Carolina. He brings a unique and personal perspective on the case, having witnessed firsthand how it unfolded in the media and in the courtroom. So let's get ready for a tough but necessary conversation as we break down one of the most disturbing true crime cases in recent memory. And let's dive right in. So I'm going to start with, as usual, my video, but first I want to talk a little bit about it. So Susan Smith was a mother who was convicted of murdering her 3-year-old child Michael and her 1-year-old Alexander, who was 14 months old, I believe. On October 25th, 1994, Susan Smith reported that her children had been kidnapped by a carjacker during a stop at a local parking lot. She claimed that a black man had approached her vehicle, forced her out, and drove off with her children inside. The initial story sparked widespread media attention, and authorities launched an intensive search to find the children and the alleged carjacker. So I'm going to go in and play this video for you guys. It's actually Susan talking about the carjacking, and then we'll start going on the interview with Ian.
At this point, based on what happened last night, do you know anything better about it now than you did last night?
No. They've got people everywhere looking for them. You can hear the helicopters are there, and but they haven't seen anything, and it's crazy. And it's been since 9 o'clock last night, and I really thought that when it got daylight they would find them just in a heartbeat, but they haven't.
Was there anything about the demeanor of the man that gives you concern?
No, in fact, when he made me get out of the car, I tried to get my children. I just begged him, please let me take them. And he said no, he didn't have time because they were in car seats and it was going to take time for me to get them out of the car seat. And he just told me, he said, but I won't hurt them. And he just took off. But he had a gun, and my big thing is they were screaming, hollering, crying, and I'm just scared that he just lost his patience or something, And I don't know. All I'm doing is just praying and just keeping my faith that they're going to be okay.
You've never seen this guy before?
No, sir. Never.
And he just came out of the blue?
I was stopped at a red light, and I was looking this way, looking toward the left, and it was just like, in a second, he was in my car. He just opened the car door, and I just screamed. I said, what are you doing? He just shut up and drive, and he had a gun, and he was poking it in my side, and told me to drive. And so I drove, and I was trying to ask him one time, why, what do you want? Please just, don't hurt me or the children. He said, and he never said anything. All he ever told me was, shut up or I'll kill you. He said, don't say anything else. And my children were crying, and I was trying to tell them, that it was okay, that, don't worry. And he would, and he let me talk to them. And then we just got maybe 3 or 4 miles down the road, and he told me, he said, I want you to stop. And I said, stop right here? He said, yeah, stop right here. And it was just in the middle of the road. And I stopped, and he told me to get out. And I was in the driver's side, he was in the passenger side. And so as I opened the door, I said, I'm going to get my children before I go. He said, no, you can't. He said, I don't have time for that. He just, and sort of pushed me on out the door, helped me get on out the door. And he slammed the door and took off. And I ran to the closest house that I could. And
I'm really sorry.
So before we get into my good friend Ian here, I want to talk a little bit about the case. so that we can just jump right into his stuff and go from there. So on October 25th, 1994, as you saw in that video, Susan Smith had reported that her children were kidnapped by a carjacker. So as the investigation unfolded, law enforcement grew extremely suspicious of Smith's story. I would have too. When I saw that video, I was extremely suspicious. I figured before she even started talking that she kind of had something to do with it. Unfortunately, just the timeline of her events did not add up, and inconsistencies in her statements became very apparent to the law enforcement. After several days of questioning, Smith ultimately confessed to the crime that she had murdered her beautiful children. She admitted that she had driven her car with her children inside to a nearby lake, where she intentionally rolled the car into the water, drowning both of her babies. Smith claimed that she had been depressed and she had been experiencing personal and emotional turmoil. She stated that she did it because she was in a relationship with a man that did not want children, so she felt trapped by her responsibilities as a mother. So the trial began in 1995, and she faced 2 counts of murder. The prosecution argued that Smith deliberately killed her children in an attempt to regain the attention of her lover because she was dealing with personal issues. That's no excuse to kill these 2 beautiful children. So at the time of the killings, ultimately, the jury did find her guilty on both of the murders, as they should, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the case drew widespread media coverage, raised questions about the intersection of mental health, family dynamics, and criminal responsibility. Her actions were condemned, and she became a symbol of maternal filicide, which is the act of a mother killing her children. And to this day, her case still continues to be discussed in criminology and psychology circles as an example of how personal relationships, mental health issues, and emotional stress can sometimes contribute to extreme acts of violence. That is still just no excuse to me at all. So she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But recently, that has been brought up, and she was brought in front of a parole board where she was ultimately denied parole. A lot of people didn't feel that Susan showed any remorse. When she went into prison 30 years ago, she was really young. She was in her 20s. So she was known to be having sex with guards. She had pen pals. She had sugar daddies. She had boyfriends. She was so focused on herself still in that time. And there was a lot of guys that were putting money on her books as well. So she seemed to be doing just fine in prison, and that's why a lot of the people feel that she didn't have that remorse because she was so busy trying to get money and boyfriends and having sex and doing things that she shouldn't have been doing in prison. So let's jump right in, and please welcome Ian, my good friend, to the Gore Horror podcast. And I want to thank him for all of his time that he put into doing this for me. I really appreciate it, and I'm very honored to have my very first guest on Gore Horror. So Ian, first I want to ask, how did you come across the Susan Smith story?
Well, thanks, Chelsea, for having me on the podcast. How did I encounter this story? From the word go, we'll just say. Working for TV News in Charlotte, and Charlotte, North Carolina is on the border of North and South Carolina. So Union, South Carolina, Union County was a part of the South Carolina that we covered. And our, guy whose beat it was to cover South Carolina got a call from someone who he routinely makes calls to in law enforcement down there saying, a woman's reported a carjacking. They've got the car and they've got her 2 kids. One's 3, one's 14 months or so. Go, Bob. Bob Ormsett, this is his name. Goes there, gets his story. Probably on the way back calls us and tells us, this is as big a deal as we think it is. And kind of in the newsroom at that time, we were thinking, this is going to be lead story till we find those kids. Minimally. And I was right. But yeah, there were only 2 stations on it that day, that Tuesday. Us and the CBS station out of Spartanburg. And the rest were playing catch up most of Wednesday.
Now, Ian, can you discuss how one of your TV news colleagues helped turn this into a national or even a worldwide story?
Now, the Thursday after the story broke, so crime was reported on Tuesday, it's Thursday. It's still really a regional story at this point. And I think part of that, I'm pretty sure part of that was because we had not heard a word out of the carjacking victim herself, the one carjacking victim who could talk to us, the mom of the kid, Susan. And so Thursday evening rolls around, 5:30, 6. Not a word from Susan, not a word from the kid's dad, David. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock rolls around, still the only family member I think who was talking was Susan's stepfather, who was kind of managing communications for the family at the time. So 11 o'clock, we all kind of do our lead stories. Every media outlet that's there is kind of camped out in Susan's stepfather's front yard, because that's where their family compound is when all this is going on. And my weekend anchor, Dave Stanley, is there with my one of the best interns I've ever worked with, Baron Johnson. And he's one of the few people we would actually let out and do, go out in the field, either do stories himself or go out with reporters and do that work. So, and of course, Dave is trying to teach him as much as he can, particularly things they don't teach him much in journalism school. So after everyone's 11 o'clock newscasts are done, everyone's still kind of there, still hoping to get, some kind of press conference or something. But again, it's at night, kind of out of townish. There's no good lighting. She'd be looking at 75 different lights from 75 different cameras, and it'd be just a madhouse. So Dave Stanley hatches a plan to try to get, the one-on-one interview with, actually one-on-two with Susan and David, the kid's dad. And he tells Barrett, if this works, if we get in there, you have exactly one job. And you're going to be taught one important lesson. And the important lesson is how to get thrown out of somebody's house. You get the story, but you get thrown out. So he gets, so Dave talks the family into the one-on-two interview, and then, pulls Barron aside. As your job is, so long as I'm interviewing David and Susan, your job is to keep that father-in-law out of the room. Just keep talking to him. Let him know it's only going to be a few more questions. We want to get your story out. We want to get your grandkids back. Just keep being his buddy while I get the story that needs to be told. So, Barron understands the assignment. Dave goes in the interview. Dave Stanley goes in the interview. David Smith, the kid's father, he asked David Smith one question, kind of right at the beginning, and then it's all on Susan. Asks her maybe 4 or 5 questions. Sometimes she's close to tears, sometimes she's in tears, sometimes she's keeping eye contact, sometimes she's not. And sometimes, like when she's, hands kind of in her face, Dave Stanley gets down on one knee so he can still make eye contact and look up at her while she's looking down. And has like his hand on her knee while he's asking like the last 2 questions. And finally, I don't even know what question it is, but eventually Susan just breaks down and is just really can't continue with the interview anyway. And at that time, her stepdad throws Dave Stanley out, throws Barron out, and then goes out in the yard and throws all the media out. So we're the only ones who have this video, right? And so this is Thursday night after 11 p.m. Eastern time. It is the lead story on the Today Show the next morning. And then every media organization everywhere is booking flights to Charlotte, and then booking rental cars and hotel rooms in as close to Union, South Carolina as possible to be on the story.
Ian, what was your first hint in the media that this was not a carjacking, but a murder?
Well, as far as when did we in the media start getting skeptical about the carjacking story that she told, it became a progressive thing. I mean, certainly, in the media, we try to take law enforcement's lead. Believe the victim, right? And at this point, for what we knew, Susan was as much a victim as anybody. But more and more, as there were no real legitimate sightings of the car, no sightings of the kids, no sightings of the suspect that fit any description that was put in the sketch artist description. The conversations in the newsroom began to come around to what if. I mean, we didn't get much past one the first layer of that answer, really until it broke that she'd confessed. And it was really a bizarre shift that we had to account for in our coverage, like right away. And of course, as it was a national story about a white woman blaming a black man for the disappearance of her kids in the South, that expressly got the attention of Oprah Winfrey, who for a day moved her talk show from Chicago down to South Carolina to have a quote unquote town hall, so that there could be a conversation about the racism associated with that. So that's one piece of it. And then the whole how could she aspect of it too. I mean, for definitely that was definitely a facet of the story for the next several days after her confession for sure.
Did you ever get a chance to actually meet Susan Smith?
The only time I know I was in the same room with Susan Smith, it was during her trial. It was during her testimony in the trial. And remember, the trial wasn't about whether she killed him or not. They stipulated that there was the defense was clear that it was her actions that resulted in the death of her own children. The defense they were putting up was really to try to keep her from not suffering the death penalty. So she was testifying at trial, and I was in the courtroom that hot summer day in Union, South Carolina, in a courtroom not particularly well designed to keep 100 media people cool. When she testified that, while she was still sort of in her relationship with David, she was having an affair with her boss. She was, having an affair with kind of the final boyfriend she had, the one who said he didn't really want to have kids, Tom Findlay. And she was also still in that sexually abusive situation with her stepfather that had been going on for a little around 10 years at that point. It was probably 4 months before the murders happened that she finally broke that off. But she admitted to all that in open court on that day. and she was, very matter of fact about it. I wouldn't say at peace. There was, I'm not a huge person on reading body language, but I could tell that there was some torment going on there.
Now, Susan had stated that she was not in the right state of mind when the killings happened. What do you think about that?
Now, before I get in the mind or try to get into the mind of Susan Smith, it's not lost on me that I'm about her age, and you, Chelsea, and the group of your friends that I know are all about the ages of Michael and Alex. You were born all about the same time, and particularly seeing you and others around you and who are about that age, and the accomplishments you've had, the journey you've had in your life, the joy, some of the setbacks and so on, that the world missed out on these two having those experiences and enriching the lives of others this way. My sympathy, whatever sympathy I would have for Susan, and what led her to do this is quite limited. That said, because I'm not a psychological pro or anything. I would say that I'm going to apply Occam's razor. The truth is, in the absence of hard facts, the truth is probably closest to the thing that requires fewest assumptions. And we know she was in a sexually abusive relationship with her stepfather for about 10 years. And there are other, she didn't have stable friendships or relationships, both of which are, hallmarks of her being a candidate for complex post-traumatic stress syndrome, CPTSD. And suicidal, thoughts, actions, and just generally making impulsive, unhealthy choices. All fits that. So it's at least credible to me that she was, as she claimed, suicidal when she, embarked on the plan to, put her car in the lake with her kids and herself in it, and that, and I couldn't speak to what would have prompted her to, exit the car and yet not try to, yet still, have the deaths of her sons occur. It's just that I'll never be able to explain. And like I said, I've been acquainted with the story since day one. So from a layman's perspective, I don't know that there's any sensible explanation.
Now, Ian, I really, again, appreciate all of your time. I am so honored to have you on my show, and your insight has meant so much, and I know it's really going to help out so much. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
I guess the only other thing I might add is the lake where Michael and Alex perished, John D. Long Lake, had, or certain, for a couple of years anyway, as long as I remained in the Carolinas, had a rather ornate monument built to them. I mean, it wasn't any official act of government that put it there. It was just people donating a pretty nice cross and putting up good pictures and just a tasteful monument to them. And actually, more people have died visiting the monument than died in Susan Smith crime, including more children, double the children. In fact, I believe on September 1st or 2nd, 1996, a family of 7 visiting the lake after dark, kind of from far away, so they wouldn't know where they're going. Their vehicle ended up in the lake, and none of them made it out. 3 adults, 4 kids. So talk about multiplying the tragedy, both on the tragedy of not being able to experience what Michael and Alex would have made of their lives, but that many others have been lost just trying to celebrate their memory.
Thank you so much, Ian, and I hope to have you on another episode again in the future. Thank you again for your time. Thank you so much again for joining Gore Horror Podcast today as we uncovered the chilling details of the Susan Smith case. The story still resonates with so many, raising so many questions about guilt, innocence, and dark complexities of the human mind. So as always, we strive to bring you these stories with sensitivity and respect for those affected. I do want to take another moment again to express my gratitude to my good friend Ian for sharing his time, expertise, and thoughtful insights on today's episode. Ian, your perspective is always invaluable, and I'm so thankful for your continued support. Before I go, remember to take care of yourselves and each other around you. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and never underestimate the power of kindness and empathy. True crime may bring us into the darker corners of humanity, but it's the light of our compassion that keeps us so grounded. Please let me know your thoughts on this case. Did you like having an extra guest on there? Do you think that it helps? Would you want to be on my podcast? Let me know your thoughts. Do you think that Susan Smith deserves parole? Let's talk about it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys all again soon.